Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3, part 2. If you remember back in part 1, we talked about the history and the specifications of the NES. Well, in part 2, we're going to disassemble one, refurbish it, put it back together, and then look at the final product. Okay, let's get started.
Alright, so today we're going to show off the Nintendo I picked up at a garage sale, along with a couple of games that I picked up from a local retro game store, along with a controller, because the Nintendo I got from the garage sale did not come with a controller or really anything. But for $5, I'm not going to complain. It's not in too bad a shape. I mean, there are some signs of wear and tear, but considering this thing is over 30 years old. But overall, it's in good shape. It's probably dirty inside. I doubt anyone's been in there to take it apart or anything, but we'll find out in a minute because we're about to open this bad boy up. And then we'll take a look at a couple of pickups I got from games and a controller. So, in the early days, Nintendo just used standard Phillips screws on their consoles. Now they use combination of tri-wings and what they call game bits, which are kind of like star drivers but reversed. So if you've never seen one before, I'll link a picture so you can see it. This is not going to fit, so I need to get a different screwdriver. Oh, it is loose, it's just stuck. So basically you just remove the 6 screws, flip the system back over, top cover goes away, and there we go. A little bit of rust spots, but it is to be expected in a system this old. But I do see some scratches or something on here. I don't know if that, I doubt that would have come from the factory, so it's possible someone was already in here. Not sure why. I don't, it's still kind of dirty inside, so it's not like they were in here cleaning it. Well, I guess we'll find out. This here is known as an RF shield, this metal plate here. It's required in a lot of electronics that could potentially emit any kind of radio interference. Something the FCC requires. You gotta play by the rules, I suppose. These things, these types of electronics rarely cause any kind of real interference that you got to worry about. In fact, they probably contribute more to a lot of these systems failing just because of the fact that they don't allow for very good airflow. And so a lot of the chips inside heat up and can't get enough cooling. Now, they're not going to overheat instantly, but over time, something heats up, cools off, heats up, cools off, and eventually it's going to fail. Come off. Yeah, there's a few rust spots on the bottom as well, but again, nothing terrible. But yeah, there's definitely signs of scratching, and maybe someone took like a sander to it or steel wool or something to try to remove the rust. I should say that the garage sale I picked this up from was actually run by a woman who owns a retro game store. So of course you're probably now asking, well, why didn't she just try to sell this in her store? And that's because of the fact that it was, in her opinion, it wasn't in good enough condition to sell retail. So she just dumped it along with a bunch of other stuff at a garage sale. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of wish I'd picked up some other stuff from there, but it was one of those garage sales where I just saw last minute. I was out driving, so I stopped in. Didn't have a ton of cash on me at the time, so it is what it is. So yeah, so there's a little bit of rust. So I guess what I'll do is finish sanding them out, steel wool, and then probably spray them with some sort of metallic Rust-Oleum paint to keep it from rusting in the future. Anyway, it's the first look at the insides. This giant piece of plastic here with this metal bar, this is the cartridge slot. This is where you put the game and makes contact with these contacts here, and that's it. It's because of this design, though, that a lot of games had trouble over time. You know, people would sit there, you know, you get the flashing screen, or maybe all the graphics would be all garbled or everything. So you take the cartridge out, blow into it, put it back in, and it would work. So you'd think it was dust or something, but that's not actually the case. A lot of the problems were because of this design that Nintendo picked for games. And the reason being is that it would put just a little bit of pressure on the cartridge port, which over time would kind of bend some of the pins a little bit. So when that would happen, the connector on the game cartridge would not make complete contact with the actual connector, and as such wouldn't work. So by taking out, putting it back in again, it would reseat the cartridge, and this time hopefully make contact with everything, and the game would work. The other reason, I'll get to that in a minute, is because of a special chip Nintendo put in here to keep people from using pirated games, unofficial games, things like that, although that's long been defeated. Anyway, there we go. And there's the bottom of the circuit board, the main motherboard basically. And this cartridge connector actually will disconnect once I remove the rest of the system board out. When I had my Nintendo as a child and it died, I actually took it apart once. Didn't know what I was doing, but kind of just guessed on everything. Another one of these I/O shields, because FCC. Looks like there's a connector here. So remove that. The RF shield should come loose, and this one's, again, a little bit of rust. Have to clean that up too. But this is what a Nintendo looks like on the inside. And as I said, the cartridge slot comes right off. And there we go. I don't see any damaged components. I don't see any broken traces. But let me inspect further before I go and say anything else. Everything looks good. A little bit of dirt inside, dust. Nothing out of the ordinary. Controller 1, controller 2 ports. This here is the power and the reset. And that's it. I mean, that's all there is really to the Nintendo.
So let's go over the motherboard a little bit closer. From the top left, you have the decoder demultiplexer chip. This is used in conjunction with the hex converter and the buffers to handle general system functions. Next, you have the expansion slot. This was never used on the NES, though on the Famicom it was used for additional accessories such as the Famicom Disk System. Now you have the hex bus buffers, which are used in conjunction with the hex converter and the decoder to handle general system functions. Next is the PPU, the picture processing unit. This handles all the video and the graphics. Next is the hex converter, used in conjunction with the hex bus buffers and decoder to handle general system functions. Now you have the CIC lockout chip, part of the 10 NES lockout system. This is used to store encryption keys, verify if a cartridge is legit, etc. Keys would be decrypted with the companion chip found in a legit game. Or, as I mentioned in part 1 and I'll mention in a little bit, another way. Next you have the VRAM. It's used to buffer graphics and video from games so they are ready to load when needed. Next is the general logic chip. This helps with feeding data to the PPU and the CPU. Now you have the work RAM. It's basically the system RAM. It's used to load data for the CPU, such as game data, controller input, etc. And the last chip is the CPU, which are the main brains of the system. In this case, it is based on the 6502 by MOS Technologies. And then, of course, you also have the cartridge edge connector there, as you saw earlier. So this leads me into discussing one of the more common problems just about everyone experienced with the original NES. Flashing screens or garbled distorted screens, or the flashing red LED. You probably remember these and how you would fix them. Take the cartridge back out, blow into it, thinking it might be dust or something, putting it back in, and then most of the time it would just work. However, it turns out there's a reason why this worked most of the time, and it's not what we necessarily thought. As I mentioned earlier, taking the game cartridge out, blowing into it, and putting it back in does not fix the issue. What is actually fixing the issue is the fact that you're reinserting the cartridge, hopefully making better contact with the pins inside the system. The reason for this is that over time those pins would get bent due to the design of the system, and after a period of time it just would no longer make proper contact with the cartridge. Now there are several ways to fix this. One, try to bend the pins back into place, but there's a risk with this in that you may over bend the pin and either break it or make it too tight of a connection for the cartridge to fit, damaging the game, the system, or both. The second option is to replace the cartridge connector. You can find replacements on eBay, retro game shops, things like that. The last way to fix it is really interesting. I can't believe someone actually figured this out, but you can take it and you can boil it for anywhere from 5 minutes to a half an hour. And what this will do is cause everything to expand and hopefully reseat all the pins back to the way they were from the factory. I had to do this with this system, and it does work. I know it sounds crazy, but it does work. There's a bunch of videos on YouTube showing it. Go ahead and look them up. Now, the second reason you would have these issues is the CIC chip. As mentioned before, the CIC chip is part of the NES system, which was used as an anti-piracy measure, and it was also intended to prevent non-Nintendo approved cartridges from being used. Nintendo wanted total control over the manufacturing and approval process based on the video game crash that happened a few years earlier. They saw what happened with Atari and other game manufacturers, and they wanted to make sure that there weren't too many garbage games out there. Plus, since they controlled cartridge manufacturing, they could control who can get access to them, thus the CIC. This actually worked with the companion chip in the cartridge. They both talked to each other, and if successful, the game started. However, sometimes the two wouldn't be able to communicate with each other properly, resulting in the flashing power LED and a blue screen. Effectively, the system was resetting itself. Sometimes it would do this to try and get the communication to work. Other times it just would not work. Now you would take the cartridge out, blow into it, put it back in, and it would just be really good timing that everything would start working again. Now, Atari did make their own version of the CIC chip known as the Rabbit, and they were able to use it successfully for a while until Nintendo sued them and they had to stop. Now there is a mod to bypass the CIC chip. This entails either clipping pin 4 on the CIC chip or grounding it. In some cases, you may want to actually connect it to a switch because there is a very, very, very small amount of games out there that will not work without the CIC chip working correctly. Not sure if I'll ever perform this mod. We will see.
Alright, let's take apart one of the games. Take a look at what the inside looks like and maybe give it a little bit of a cleaning, although this cartridge I just grabbed, Super Mario Bros. Isn't in too bad of a shape, but we'll give it a cleaning anyway. Now, the thing about NES games and Game Boy games and many others in Nintendo's library is they don't use standard screws, Phillips, flathead. They use something called, by the community, as a game bit. Basically, it's a security bit. I think this one's 3.8 millimeter, and then the other one is 4.2 millimeter. This one is used more by Genesis games and other Sega cartridge-based games. But you can get these on eBay dirt cheap. I think I paid $6 for both of these. But yeah, so this here is what a basic game looks like on the inside. Some cartridges might be a little longer, taller, and very few of them, at least early on in the NES's life, were actually Famicom cartridges plugged into a special adapter that would work in an American NES. And that's basically because of the fact that they didn't have enough games made yet for the US market, so they just moved those over. A lot of the games weren't in Japanese, so they could pretty much use them all over the world. Let's go ahead and give this a quick cleaning, just since we've got it open. Just a standard alcohol swab pad, that's all. Now, rubbing alcohol dries pretty quickly, so you don't have to worry about letting this dry like overnight or anything like that. I mean, if that stuff worries you, yeah, by all means, but you usually don't have to. And then that's all there is to it. We'll put this back together, give the outside a quick wipe, and then we'll move on to other components. And then we'll just toss this to the side for now to let dry. Next thing I want to take a look at is the controller. And as I mentioned in my pickups video and a few other places, this is the redesigned NES controller. And yeah, just as I thought, same connector as the original controller has, which makes it nice because if in the event that you break this, you can probably get replacements online. Should just, yeah, and that's it. So that's the inside. Oh yeah, there's gunk in there, probably pop or something. But this is basically it. It's actually a slightly smaller version of the actual original NES controller board, maybe a little bit taller. Same width, give or take. These contact pads basically make the connection between two sides in order to register a button press. If you have sticky buttons or anything, more than likely something spilled in there or just years and years of oils and skin have gotten in there. So you should open it up and clean it out every so often. Similar setup with that and with the control pad. Wow, this is really dirty. So I might require a soap bath, which I will not do on camera. But I just wanted to show you guys the insides. There's really not much to it in terms of circuitry. Most controllers are going to look in some way similar, even modern controllers. Yeah, they'll have more circuits and more contact pads and things like that. But for the most part, they are going to be similarly designed. Okay, while the controller and its parts are soaking in soap, and by the way, it's just regular dish soap and warm water. Just throw it into some kind of container, let them soak up. A couple hours is probably the minimum you want to let it. I might leave mine overnight and just finish rinsing everything off in the morning and then put everything back together. But while that's happening, let us move on to the next part, and that is reassembling everything.
So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at it. So if you saw my August pickups video, I also picked up a few games: Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Iron Sword, Wizards and Warriors 2. Fortunately, I won't be able to try Duck Hunt because I don't have one of those older CRT TVs, the old tube ones, and the zapper just will not work with modern televisions. It's just the way the technology works, unfortunately. If you remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, basically a torture test, especially some of the levels, and if you play the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then there's Iron Sword, which is Wizards and Warriors 2. I did play part 1. I never played part 3. Maybe I'll pick them up just so I have a copy of them and I can try them out. And that, my friends, is the NES. I may revisit it in the future if I decide to do any mods, but for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. Hit the thumbs up if you liked the video, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe. If you didn't like the video, hit the thumbs down, but please leave a comment explaining why, so that I can make improvements in the future. Thanks all, and I'll catch you later.